Welcome to the Professor Dame Jessica Rawson Chinese Art History Lecture Series 2026, jointly organized by the Department of Fine Arts and the Institute of Chinese Studies, the Chinese University of Hong Kong, with the Hong Kong Palace Museum as our co-organizer. I'm Yuki Ho, your MC for today's opening lecture, and a graduating student from the Department of Fine Arts at CHK. We are honored to have Professor Dame Jessica Rawson from the University of Oxford as our 2026 Distinguished Visiting Professor, generously sponsored by the北山堂Foundation to deliver 3 public lectures during her visit at CHK. Today, we commence the first lecture, China's Unique Architecture, a New View from Recent Archaeological Discoveries, in this remarkable series presented under the overarching theme, the Loess and China's Civilization. Now, it's our privilege to invite Professor Dennis Loyuk Ming, Vice-Chancellor and President of the Chinese University of Hong Kong, to deliver the welcoming remarks for the Chinese Art History Lecture Series. Professor Lo, please.
So Professor Dame Jessica Rawson, Miss Lillian Karen, distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's given me a great pleasure to officiate the opening lecture of Professor Dame Jessica Rawson Chinese Art History Lecture Series 2026. Now, first of all, allow me to extend my warmest welcome to Professor Dame Jessica Rawson. We're deeply honored to have you with us today. This marks your second visit to the Chinese University of Hong Kong since the Mok Hing Yu lecture in 2011, and we're truly delighted to welcome you back. Now, this year marks the 5th edition of the Chinese Art History Lecture Series, a milestone we're proud to celebrate. This lecture series is an important component of the Chinese Art Visiting Scholar Program, which is jointly organized by the Department of Fine Arts and the Institute of Chinese Studies at CHK, with generous sponsorship from北山堂Foundation. Now, indeed, the北山堂Foundation has supported this visiting scholar program since its launch in 2021. The program has successfully brought leading scholars from around the world to our university for periods ranging from 2 weeks to a full semester, fostering deep academic engagement and dialogue across a wide field of Chinese art within our academic community. This aim echoes CHK's unique position as a leading university in China research. It has also strengthened our partnership with local museums, particularly our co-organizer this year, the Hong Kong Palace Museum. As we begin a new chapter today, we look forward to bring our community together, once again to learn, to exchange ideas, and to celebrate pioneering scholarship in Chinese art. Our speakers today, Professor Rawson, is a world-renowned scholar in the fields of Chinese art and archaeology. So under the overarching theme, the Loess and Civilization, she'll offer a fresh perspective, drawing from recent archaeological discoveries to demonstrate the importance of the Loess in Chinese history, particularly in the development of China's ceremonial architecture. Professor Rawson has been widely celebrated for a lifelong dedication to Chinese studies, her profound knowledge of art objects, and her vigorous, holistic, and interdisciplinary research approaches. Her lecture today, as well as those in the coming 2 weeks, will undoubtedly inspire us, refreshing and enriching our understanding of Chinese civilization. I'd also like to express our sincere gratitude to the北山堂Foundation for its unwavering support. The Foundation is not only a valued partner and sponsor of this lecture series, but through initiatives such as the北山堂Doctoral Thesis Grants and the J.S. Lee Memorial Fellowship Program, has provided essential support for nurturing the younger generation of scholars, including many of our fine arts students and colleagues, and for advancing research and education in Chinese art in Hong Kong and around the world. So finally, I wish this year's lecture series every success. To all of our guests, may your time with us be both rewarding and memorable. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Low. Please be seated. May we invite Professor Maggie Wan Chui-Ki, Head of the Graduate Division of Fine Arts and Associate Professor in the Department of Fine Arts, to introduce our esteemed speaker, Professor Dame Jessica Rawson. Professor Wan, please.
Dear Professor Dame Jessica Rawson, Mr. Lian Kiang, Professor Dennis Low, distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the first lecture delivered by Professor Dame Jessica Rawson, distinguished visiting professor at the Department of Fine Arts and the Institute of Chinese Studies, a position generously supported by the北山堂Foundation. Today's event is particularly meaningful to me, as Professor Rawson was the mentor who guided me into the study of Chinese art and archaeology over 25 years ago. Her scholarship has shaped not only my understanding of ancient Chinese civilization, but also that of many others around the world. It is therefore my greatest honor to introduce her. Professor Rawson is Professor of Chinese Art and Archaeology at the University of Oxford. She worked for over 20 years at the British Museum and was responsible for the renovation of the famous Sir Joseph Houghton Gallery of Oriental Antiquities. In 1994, she moved to Oxford, where she became Warden of Merton College and later Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the University of Oxford, making significant contributions to the establishment of the Oxford China Centre. In 2017, she was awarded the Charles Lang Freer Medal by the Freer Gallery of the Smithsonian Institute for her lifelong contribution to the study of Chinese art and archaeology. She was also the recipient of the prestigious Tom Prize in Sinology in 2022. Throughout her academic career, Professor Rawson has been devoted to the study of Chinese material culture. She specialized in ancient Chinese bronze, jades, ornamental system, and burial practices, with particular emphasis on cultural exchange between China and Eurasia. Professor Rawson is renowned for her ability to unveil the language of objects in order to interpret and understand ancient Chinese societies, their beliefs, interactions, and connections. Her acclaimed publications, including Chinese Ornaments, The Lotus and the Dragon, Chinese Jade from the Neolithic to the Qing, Mysteries of Ancient China, China the Three Emperors, 1662 to 1795, as well as her latest book entitled Life and Afterlife in Ancient China, published in 2023, all exemplified her perceptive understanding of ancient artifacts and the worldview embedded in them. Professor Rawson's recent research has highlighted the importance of Loess, or Hoàng土, in China's cultural and architectural development. Today, we are very fortunate to have Professor Rawson here to deliver the lecture entitled China's Unique Architecture, a New View from Recent Archaeological Discoveries. Let us all give a round of applause to welcome Professor Dame Jessica Rawson.
Thank you very much. Thank you, first of all, the Vice-Chancellor, for coming here and welcoming me, and I feel that is a great honour. And also to Maggie, whose long-term attention to my classes and my work has been a similar honour of a different kind. And of course, I wish to thank the北山堂 Foundation and the Institute of Chinese Studies, the Department of Fine Art, for making it possible for me to be here, to join you all, and to talk to you. And that is a great honour and a great privilege, and above all, a great pleasure. I suppose I ought to apologise for embarking on a difficult subject, the Loess and your architecture. However, I think it's an important field, and I have enjoyed it very much through my long travels with Chinese colleagues in Peking University and Hangzhou China Academy of Art. We begin with a view of the palaces of the imagination, really. This is a kind of dream version of the Gugong, perhaps. But what you see is an absence of the platforms. And I'm going to talk to you about the basis on which these buildings were erected. But it's a long story, and it takes you to a different part of China, to a part of China that's far in the north, here to the city of Shimao. And this is in the blue area, which one might call the Arc, the outer area of central China, in which many people were in touch with both the northwest and with central China. And the story is about how what happens up here reaches early Tao, Zhengzhou and Anyang, and begins the dynastic history of China. So I'm looking backwards. But before I get there, I will explain to you that you need to remember that the Loess is everywhere. And you all know the terracotta warriors, and it's built in a building that was ramped. These are Loess dug down in the Loess, and it had roofs. This was a roofed building for the terracotta warriors, and this is the Loess, and the warriors are, of course, made of Loess. So it's a huge area which we will look at in more detail as I go along. This is what it looks like. And you all know it. Those of you who've been to northern China all know this yellow stuff. It's a wind-blown type of sand, but it's much finer than sand. And the whole of northern China has different forms of this material. So it forms natural terraces, and it's the natural formation of terrace that we'll see in the buildings. And though I'm not going to explain in huge detail, these tombs will occur again. And it is the tombs which alerted me to what is a major issue in your country. You could not imagine the deep tombs of this, the Shang dynasty. We are in 1200 BC. This is a royal tomb at Anyang. You could not do this in any other country but China. And it's only the depth of the deposit of Loess that makes it possible to dig down. If you were in England and you dug more than 1.5 meters, the local authority would be round immediately and say, why have you not protected the sides? Because it's reasonably damp, it would fall in. So that anywhere in southern China, this kind of vertical digging is impossible. So the origin of the deep tombs of China must lie in this area of Loess. And in fact, the early Neolithic tombs before the Shang are found here. And this is a current new discovery, a Shang tomb in the Loess Plateau at a site called Zaigou. And here you see their chariots. This again is a Shang tomb. It's probably very unfamiliar to most of you, but it's a new discovery and a very important site. And it's contemporary with this tomb. And though they're several hundred kilometers apart, the two areas are clearly in contact. And it is part of this contact that brought the deep tombs from this Loess Plateau to the Anyang area, where it is still possible, though the Loess is only 30 to 50 meters deep, it is still possible to dig deep tombs. And the tomb thing continues. The tomb tradition continues down to this time, and this is the Ming dynasty. So this is not a minor development. If you think about the tomb structure and the creation of very deep tombs with many different rooms and much material in them, it starts in the Loess Plateau and it continues to the Qing dynasty. So it is a long tradition, and that is the subject of the book that Maggie mentioned. I'm not going to discuss that in detail, but it will come up again. However, what I'm going to talk about are these platforms. Here you see the Forbidden City, the Gugong, and at the center of the Gugong is this immense platform. It's a single platform in 3 tiers. So without it, of course, the buildings would be on the ground. What the platforms do is raise the building, but they do much more. and we will see that in a minute. Here you find people assembling. This is a tourist time, and these are tourists visiting this site, but they can only mount it through central staircases. This use of platforms with stone facades is deceiving you on purpose. They are not made of stone, and Chinese did not build in stone for very good reasons. The Loess covers the stone. The stone is very little visible across the whole of northern China. So we have here one of the largest contrasts between China and the West. This is the Mediterranean, and this is China. And this is a complete contrast. This is Selanuti in Sicily, a typical Greek temple, ruined, of course, and it's built on a stone platform, but this platform is built on a stone series of foundations, and the foundations reach the rock. So it's rock, foundations, platform, and everything is stone. So this is a typical building of the Mediterranean, and through the Roman Empire's spread, the use of stone as a ceremonial and important building spread all over Europe. If you turn now to the very famous Hall of Supreme Harmony, it is not made of stone. I'm not going to talk in detail about the structure of wood, because that's been widely covered by many architectural historians. I'm going to talk about these platforms, because without the platforms, it would not stand high in a sort of universal statement of power or of the importance of the emperor. And the facing is indeed of stone, but that's not what it's built of. It's built of earth. And I'm very, very fortunate to have visited the Gugong recently in November and viewed their archaeological excavation. And this is the typical format of the foundation of all the buildings in the Gugong. They're made of alternating rammed earth. These brown layers are rammed earth, and they're alternating with crushed brick. In this case, we're looking at a very early Ming example, and it has fragments of shards in them of the 12th to 13th century. And there is a very extensive excavation in the Gugong, not open to the public, but the chief finds, like this, the discovery of these different foundations. Here you can see different foundations of these platforms at different periods in the actual earth. They are being excavated in a large area, which is to the west of the main center of the city of the Gugong. And so this is the Longzong Gate, and this is where the excavation is taking place. And they are looking for the foundations of the Damingdian, that is the Yuan dynasty palace. And they have found parts of the Damingdian in the pits in which the columns were placed. They've also found foundations of the early Ming and of the later Ming. So they have very clear discoveries now of the kinds of foundation that were used both for the palaces and for the walls of the Forbidden City. And they are all of earth alternating with crushed brick. There's nothing made of stone. And so this is a very good example of, from the 14th to the 18th century, of major palace structures in which the best and most important structures are made with an alternating layers of earth and crushed brick. And we have good examples of that. And these are the kinds of papers that I have consulted on the Gugong, and I hope some of you can take a note, but I'll move on quickly because this is where we learn about it. This is the Yingzhao Fa Shi, many of you know, as the major architectural treatise of China in the 11th or 12th century. There are many editions, and it does indeed tell you that you need to make it with layers of earth and brick, so that the idea of building, as we see in the Gugong, was already fully current in the Song dynasty. So I'm going to go way back and show you how we reach the Song dynasty, or how we reach the Song and later dynasties, because this is a very actually essential feature of Chinese architecture, which is not widely described, at least in Western literature. And why are the platforms important? And that is a question for everybody to ask themselves. What do the platforms do? The platforms do several very important things. They raise the building above the people, if you like. They make the buildings visible from afar, and I think that is a very important feature. But within the Gugong, we know that they were used for ceremonies. And how do we know? We have here the 2 leaves, I'll show you the next in a minute, of the wedding of the Guangxu Emperor in the 19th century. And here you see the organization of the officials and the courtiers who are going to accompany the carriage of the invitation to the betrothed lady who is coming to meet to marry the Guangxu Emperor. So in a ceremonial fashion, they are organized on these platforms. And here you get another view of the same thing. And here, actually here is the carriage about to leave. So that this is going, and the officials are kneeling in front of the carriage that is going to leave down these steps, across the platform, down more steps, and out through the Meridian Gate. So that the existence of the platforms is not simply to give the height, but also to provide what is needed in a ceremonial function. And we see this much, much earlier. Well, I'll show you in a minute. I'm, as a foreigner, very conscious of going into this building through a complicated passage. There's this huge gate, then there's the water and bridges, then you climb through another gate, if you like, into the main courtyard, which has a row of stones where officials would kneel, and then you go up and up, along and down, and this is repeated all over the place. So there's a strong way of organizing official behavior within the Gugong. It is not simply a flat walk. You have to go up and down, and only certain people would have been allowed up this staircase. They would have been very strongly limited. So that we need to see the architecture of platforms as part of a whole official performance of ceremonies. And if we don't note that, we are missing what half this architecture is about. It's not just a visual display, it is also for official performances and for religious performances. And here we see an example. This is in Dunhuang, this is a wall painting in Dunhuang of Cave 148, and it's the 8th century. And on the right, to make it a little more easy to interpret, I've put somebody's sketch. The buildings here are, if you like, paradisical buildings. The Buddha is here with his bodhisattvas and attendants and here, and then there are more attendants here. And there are many versions of this kind of painting of paradise. But all the time you see the platforms and the staircases. This is not to say that all of these were built of solid materials. These may sometimes in palaces have been installed for certain ceremonies, but because they look very colored and they look movable. But undoubtedly, large platforms were an essential feature in the Tang dynasty and probably much earlier. So that we need to remember that the platform has a function far beyond its elevation of a building. Now, I'm going to move right to the far north and explain where they come from. And there are 2 groups of sites I'm going to mention. I'm going to very briefly mention the south, because in some ways one could argue that part of China's very early history lies in the south. It lies in Liangzhu, it lies on the Yangtze River, and you can think, why am I not going to talk about the south? Well, one very strong reason is that building platforms for any sort of building in the south would be not very permanent, because it's very wet, and if you try to build layer upon layer in this very wet environment, it forms a mound, but not a series of layered platforms. So we're dealing with the arrival of layered platforms, and the very early work in the south is not the direct source. It does not mean it didn't have platforms, it certainly did. But we're going to look at a different group of sites. The very earliest site is here at Nanzhou, at Lushangmao, and then we're going to move to this one, which is the big triangle, is Shimao. And also I've shown you Jiaigou, it's there. So this is the area in which these platforms developed. And I'm going to explain that thinking about that has required not just geology, it also, of course, archaeology, but also climate issues. So this is a multidisciplinary result, if you like, but an enormously important piece of archaeology. Here is the south, and if you can see it once, it's very wet. Here is a platform area of a city surrounded by water. This is Chengtoushan, is very early. This is Liangzhu, which is from about 3,200 BC to 2000, a long history. And you can see it once, there's a lot of water management. So water management is absolutely key. And of course, it has at the center a large platform on which there were probably buildings. And this here at Jijiaocheng, this is down here, is very likely to have had a very complicated wooden building because there's plenty of foundation marks for this kind of structure. And though I'm not going to talk about wooden buildings, it's just as likely that the wooden buildings came from the south. It's the platforms I'm going to attribute to the north. So there's plenty of research on this area. It's crucially important, but I shall mention the climate issue in a minute. So here is the Loess Plateau. So this is really my second major point. We need to think about this region, which very few people I know have visited. And you can see why. It's extremely difficult to build roads in this area, and it's eroded drastically. So there are these gullies, and people occupied the upper area on this sort of level. And here you see a large platform, and here you see a platform with tombs. This is the Jiaigou excavation. And it's a very important discovery made very recently in the center of the Loess Plateau. This is the picture of this sort of area in the summer, covered in greenery, often shrubs. And here it is in the autumn, where it's all died back. And back here is a little bit of the Yellow River. So the Yellow River is falling right through this area. And this, if you like, orange area marks the arc, the edge of an area where there's mixed agriculture and mixed pasture. And here, this brown area is the Loess Plateau. And I shall show you a bit more about it now. It's a very, very important geological phenomenon, and it's not known anywhere else in the world. Loess is wind-blown dust, and it looks like sand, but it's much finer than sand. You can't build in sand in the desert, but you can build in Loess because it's a fine dust, and you have to think of how the winds work. You are only too aware here of how the winds work. They come in the summer from the south, from here, across the Pacific, across the ocean, and they're very moisture laden, and they drop it all over here, and they go on, and as they reach this part, it dries a bit, and this area has less rain. So we're in Gansu, northern Shanxi, southern Shanxi, but it stops at the Qinling Mountains. This is an immensely high ridge, and the huge deposits stop here. The winds change dramatically in October, and the southern monsoon wind retreats. It pulls wind from the north, and it pulls wind from what we call the westerlies across Eurasia, and it pulls wind from the Arctic. It's very cold, and what they're depositing is very fine dust from the glacial deposits, ground, and from the Gobi Desert. And they've done this for millions of years. And so where it's dark brown, this is 200 to 300 meters deep. This is not a minor phenomenon. This is one of the major phenomena of the world, and it happens to be in China. And when the Yellow River runs through it, as you know, it will flood and take the water off across the North China Plain. So the whole of the area of North China is covered in loess. And it's not all the same. The loess varies tremendously geologically, and when it's deposited as by the water, it contains quite a lot of clay samples, so that the terracotta warriors are only one set of ceramics. All ceramics made in the north are in some way dependent on Loess deposits, but it requires potters of great skill to identify which ones can be used for what sort of ceramic. But you all know about the ceramics here in the Gansu corridor, in this area, and across northern China. And this interest in Loess was started, at least in part, as a ceramic issue by an expert in the UK, Nigel Wood, and his interests have never ceased, and perhaps I gradually came to understand that this is something that I need to think about if I want to understand how and why China developed. So China could not escape this. It cannot escape the monsoon and the humidity, and of course in the south the growth of rice. It cannot escape the Loess if people are going to live on the North China Plain. So it's the fact that we're talking about something that moves people from the north onto the North China Plain that is the background for the big dynasties of the Xiaoshangzhou. Without this, Xiaoshangzhou did not happen. So we all know about the creation of walls, that these are made by ramming the earth, the yellow earth, through planks. And because the grains are very fine and a bit sharp and a bit, if you like, more like chips, they form very strong walls. And the Great Wall of China was made in this way. Later on, it was faced with stone, but here, this is an example of a Shang Dynasty wall around the city at Jiagou. And this is the city I'm going to talk about. This is the central series of platforms of Shimao in the north. And you can see over here, it's made of, the central part is made of a series of platforms that are separated from one another. And here, the separation is marked by walls made of stone. The area is very far north towards the Yellow Rivers of Great Bend, and there is some stone, but there's a vast amount of loess. And the whole thing is both a natural hill that is then built up with these walled, ramped earthen platforms, and on the top they are excavating here the large, probably palatial or ceremonial structures and the tombs of the elite. So this is one of China's great big cities of the period from 3000 to 2000, and above all, this is a 2000 BC city. So this, back to this map, we are now where the triangle is, here, and this is the key area where the Shimao city had probably a small state. And what I'm going to describe to you is part of this history, and then how it moves south towards early Tao, Zhengzhou, and Anyang, because we need to connect this area to this area. So this is a very important development. Now, how did it happen? What did happen? Well, first you have to look back at the Loess and think that this is not a soft, innocent material. This is a material that you can make into, by pounding it or ramming it, you can make into defensive walls. You can also make into platforms, and it is sufficiently strong that if you dig it, you can dig deep tombs. And it has been much examined by geologists. It's very little examined by archaeologists. But geologists are the secret to understanding the Loess, and I am very grateful to Tang Zihua, who enabled me to meet the geologists in the Institute of Geology and Geophysics in Beijing, the part of CAS, the Chinese Academy of Science, and they are the experts in this material. They show that it's not all the same. Some of it is very, very difficult to use because it has long, if you like, pipes in it that hold air, and other bits are very strong and easy to ramp. So that we're looking at a very important geological phenomenon that is much studied because it's very important to an enormous part of northern China. You can cut it vertically, as you see on the left, or it will form pillars, as you see on the right. So why did people live there? And this is something for which I owe a great deal to Professor Zhang Chi of Beida, who first made me realize through his lectures given at Oxford that we better pay attention. He will argue, and there is a lot of debate, that climate forced people to the north. It doesn't have to be that reason alone, but there, again, with help from the Geological Institute, it is clear that there were major climate changes around 3000 to 200 BC, 3200 BC to 2000, even 1800. There was a cooling period. There was also serious flooding. The southern area that I showed you, the cities there were drowned out, and they do not continue. And people move here to live in cave houses. So in a cooling period, cave houses are very, very satisfactory. They are warm in winter and cool in summer. And this is a modern scene, but they go way back. And here you see an example of a site on the top of a hill with rows of cave houses. This is the remains of a cave house, and you can see that it has several rooms. It has an entry room and a rear room, and it often has niches in which they store objects. This is a very efficient way to live, and people still live like that. If you travel through northern China, you will see a lot of this. So I'm very much indebted to the work of the Beida Professor Zhang Chi, but two others who have looked at the climate situation as well as the geological situation. This is not something that you can look at alone. I have not been able to study this without help from these people in very different disciplines. And what do they produce? This is the area where platforms come. And both platforms, this is Nanzhou, which is the earliest, right down in the south, southeast, southwest, towards this is in Gansu province. This is where I'm getting in trouble. I shall move away. Here, Nanzhou. This is Lushanmao here, and Nanzhou. So they're moving this way. This, we have perfectly good evidence that before we get to Shumao, we have earlier platform building, and on the whole, they're on the top of a hill. Nanzhou is not, but Lushanmao and many others are high on a hill. So you therefore are looking at something that suggests that they're getting out of the way. They are worried about something, and they surely are. Shumao is clearly protecting itself with walls and also with standing high above water. Have I missed a cell? And we need to look at this. This is a site in Inner Mongolia, which is clearly heavily protected. Here is a gateway made of stone, and here are weapons. And these stone-headed weapons are a type of weapon you would find in Siberia. Because not only is there a problem with the climate and a certain degree of cooling, and this movement and filling up the Loess plateau, there's something else happening. And that is the animals, the oxen, sheep, and goats, which are domesticated in Western Asia, are arriving across Siberia. Now, those herded animals are not domesticated indigenously in China. They are domesticated in the far west, and they are walked across or moved across with people across the big steppe area. And the people in the steppe already use bronze weapons. This is ahead of China, and they already reuse or redevelop stone arrowheads. And this is a very important change, and the arrival of animals probably did two things. It may have brought new people. It may have explained why there's a sense of need for protection, but it also provides a new food. It's a new economy to herd animals, as well as the crops, which may be suffering from the cooling period. The animals provide not only meat, but cheese and milk. And so they become a standard part of northern China and provide China with a form of dual economy. So I would like to emphasize that we are not looking at a simple development. We're looking at something major, which is a pivot for the change in the economy and the change in structure and the change of people who are moving going to move south. So they have moved north to make use of the people with animals, perhaps. They built walls to protect themselves. But they're certainly using a large number of animals, and large deposits of animals have been discovered around this area. I mean, bones, of course. So this is not a minor development. This is a major development in China's history, which up to now has not been acutely considered. So here is Shimao. It's a much larger site than the one I've just shown you, but it too is clearly worried about protection. The people here have built an elaborate type of gate. So this is a gate which has been excavated at Shimao, and it works like this. This is Loess in the center, and it has stone walls. So these are two huge gates, and to get in, you don't come this way. You've got to go this way, and this way, and this way, which gives the people here on these two gate posts or gate areas the ability to shoot you down. They can kill you if they don't want you. So that the idea of having these protected gates suggests that there is some sort of problem. The Chinese have no views about this problem, and it may simply be to protect their animals and people in difficult times. But they have also found these larger flint or stone arrowheads, but they're also spearheads. And the spearheads and the arrowheads are found in Siberia, and both in what is called the Sema-Turbino culture, but also in the Andronovo culture. So there's clear evidence that there is an infiltration, it's probably only a small infiltration of outsiders with animals, which leads to the change, quite a considerable change in the economy. And it's a very beneficial change because it means that more land can be occupied. This land is better occupied with some herded animals as well as crops. So that this is a development that benefits China in spreading populations across a larger part of their huge area. And also, they are incredibly interesting engineers. This is one of the Shima walls. You can see how large it is, you can see how carefully shaped the stones are, and the holes are very important. They had wooden trunks inside them. So what we're looking at is a way of reinforcing the wall to hold it against the Loess, because the main structure is Loess. This is a facade, a facing. Well, if you look at the drawing on your right, that is a drawing for building a current wall and a bank for a motorway today. It's a well-known system. It's an extremely important system for building, reinforcing and holding the stone wall against the earthen bank. And so anywhere in England you might see this. It is indeed mentioned in the Yingzhou Shi, and it's also mentioned in excavation of a number of different sites that have this particular combination of a facade, possibly of stone, and a way of holding it back to an earthen center. But this is a sign of the extraordinary sophistication of Shimao. Shimao is one of the great, if you like, engineering feats of the world, which has not been looked at much until very recently. It was first excavated properly in the years 11 to 12. So they've been working on it for more than 10 years. But in China, that is normal. Excavations of very important sites in mainland China take between 10 and 20 years, and they often don't reveal what's happening for the first 5 or 8 years, and only gradually do you come to understand it. So it is, to me, a miracle. Then on the top, there is still a lot of work to be done, but up here is, if you like, a sort of palace and burial area, which is now being thoroughly examined, but will take some time to reach publication so that I can read it in England. But certainly I've been there twice, and I think this is probably one of the big discoveries of China. And here you see another example of this kind of wall and the place where they would have placed a wooden trunk, probably quite a big, long, large section of wood would have gone in here. So that in terms of engineering, this is a quite extraordinary site, and for a long time people were unwilling to think how it came about. But by now it's clear that it was inhabited by people in the locality. They moved towards creating a center that they could protect, but genetically they have been shown to belong to the larger area around Shimao and not to include a large number of people from other areas. My next 2 or 3 slides is really to show how we can now move from Shimao south into the sites where bronze was used. They have found metallurgy here. It's not necessarily the very origin of metallurgy in China, but like the animals, metallurgy is a Western Asian development which was brought across the steppe, and perhaps the earliest has come through Mongolia into the Hershey Corridor, but then also other people have moved across the northern part of the Loess Plateau as far as Dadianzi and Trufang, north of Beijing. So that the northern area is playing a very important role in the technological development and the scientific development and also the farming development of China at this moment. So we have to move now from, I'm going to show you 2 things which suggest that we move from Shimao, we're through Taosi to early Tao, Zhengzhou and Anyang. And this is the Xiaoshangzhou area. And so this is the antecedents of the Xiaoshangzhou. So what we see is the use of platforms. And here is Lushan Mao, which you've seen. And here are 2 platforms at early Tao. And this is the form of the platform of the Western Zhou. So there's a continuing development from the Loess Plateau through Shimao to early Tao, where the bronzes are first used efficiently, where you see how buildings are built on the platform and gates and entrances are created at the big front, and the same goes for Western Zhou. There's another feature that suggests this connection from Shimao down to the North China Plain, and that is these faces. Now this has really puzzled everybody, and so much puzzled that people at once said, Shimao doesn't belong to China, but it does. It quite clearly belongs to China. But there is some, I'm not going to suggest it today, there are some who suggest this is related to work in Siberia, but I think there's it's going to take a long time to prove or disprove this. But please look at the features of these faces. They have 2 outstandingly clear features, an outline of the eye and then a full filling of the eye, not a separate pupil, but a filling. And they have a large fat nose like this, and they've got grinning teeth. That one is very rare. A single pillar like that is unique in Shimao at the moment, but there are plenty of walls with faces on them. And here we get a monster face or spirit face with eyes, with a sort of horns and mouth. We'll see more of him. And also a face of a man, the same outline of the eyes, the rounded nose, the teeth, and he has earrings. Now, the only reason I think one should look to Siberia are for the earrings. Everything else could be local, but the earrings suggest to me, oh well, who likes earrings? Well, it's certainly the Siberians. But we're now going to see that actually there's a very strong local contact with jade. So here are 2 stone examples from Shimao. The same outline, the solid eye, the earrings, the rounded nose and the teeth, and here are the projections, which I would say this kind of face is some sort of spirit. And it's exactly like this one, and this is from a well-documented site in Shijiahe in Hubei. And it's called, these are late jades, so early 2000s or late 1800, and they spread. They're very small, they're very beautiful, and they travel, and examples are found at Shimao. So jade and the faces are clearly connected. Here is a face with little hooks under its eyes, and this guy has hooks under its eyes. And he has earrings too, and this one only has sort of hangers, but In this case, it's become a rounded nose with outline rather than solid. And then we move to this, and this is a bronze on the left. And I compare it with this very thin stone piece from Shumao that's a large stone plank, and it's got a face in the middle, but it's got two either creatures or which have, if you like, hooked tails. And the hooked tail is seen here. You've got the eyes and the nose that you see there, but you've got this hooked feature that has come out of this stone carving. So that the stone carvings are very closely related to the bronzes. And the bronzes, the use of bronze comes from the north, and they develop into the bronzes we know from early Tao, Zhengzhou, and Anyang. So I'm forcing you to consider that Shumao, with its stones, creates a contact that takes this design into the Central Plains. So here we are, the vessels, which we're all familiar with, and here we have the outline of the eye with a solid center, and here we have the long hook tail with like a fish. And this is this hook tail from the stone, same sort of eyes. And we find this one is from this famous bronze from Panlongcheng, and here is one from Zhengzhou. So we're moving into the early Shang dynasty. So Shumao has had an extraordinary contribution to make. It has provided us with the platforms, and it has provided us with designs on the stones that look like the antecedents of the bronzes. They're also connected to the jades, and we absolutely do not know how this series of designs traveled around China, but clearly they have a very wide impact. And I think the next generation needs to sort that out. I have no final decision to tell you how this happened, but I'm absolutely certain that Shumao is making a contribution. So having got this far, and having got from Shumao with platforms for buildings to early Tao, and with bronzes that go from Zhengzhou to Anyang and platforms in all these places, I'm now going to say that we have to see a later development that takes us to the Gugong, because I've made a very big suggestion, but I think many people who work at Shumao would like me to say this. They do think that the platforms make a big contribution to Taosi, to early Tao, Zhengzhou, and Anyang, that the platforms all go this way. So now we have to look at what happens next, and I call this the footprints of Shumao. And we need to go back to the tombs. So here is a Western Zhou tomb, just to show you there's a continuity with the tombs that I mentioned already, the Shang tombs. You can't do this except in the Loess. You cannot do it in non-Loess areas because the walls fall in. So now we come to the next stage where we go to mounds. And what happens next in China is they start to put mounds over tombs. This is an Anhui as it happens, and I actually think this is a fairly unusual tomb because it's circular. Circular tombs are unknown in China, but of course they're known in Siberia. So I speculate that it's something to do with the north, where they're making imitation. This has got imitation boulders around it. But above all, it's got this mound, and you can see there's some sort of stepping on it. So the stepping is what we need to think about. Here is a very important, the single architectural plan. This is the bronze plate, is a plan for the tomb of the king of Zhongshan, buried in the 3rd century, or 4th to 3rd century, in Hebei province. And he laid out the plan because he was very anxious that his ministers would not honor his wishes to bury his concubines and his wife in this way. And indeed, they probably didn't. But you can see that people have, on the mounds that did survive, here is one of the surviving mounds, they found remains of buildings. They found remains of tiles and fragments of buildings. And therefore, one particular architectural historian suggests, I think very convincingly, that there were buildings round the whole mound. So if you can imagine that you want to make an impression on the world, if you have a mound and then you build buildings on every tier, you have got a very impressive building. And so I think we are looking at that. And we have confirmation that this is what happened in day-to-day life. So this is on the right is the reconstruction. And I've taken it from the work of Yang Honggun there. But at the same time, incised on bronze vessels, here you see the buildings on their platforms. This is the building, this is the platform, this is the staircase to go up to the platform. So by this date, which is the same sort of time of 4th to 3rd century BCE, they are building buildings on platforms, and that they're very likely to be putting some of them on tombs. And it's also very likely that some of the buildings are built on an earthen mound to support the platforms. This example is very interesting. You can see these are proper Han Chinese in long robes, and here there are assistants who are wearing leggings and little tunics perhaps, and these are probably outsiders. So they're probably mixed populations, and we see much the same in these examples as well. These are all incised on bronzes that can be dated 4th to 3rd century, the date of the Zhongshan tomb. So here we have a very good example of the continuity or the beginning of a proper building on these platforms. And here, these are the stepped tombs in the Qi state in Shandong province. I have seen these recently. They're now covered in shrubs and trees, but when they're excavated, they look like this. And inside, they have stepped inside structure as well. So that the building of the tombs is quite closely related to the building of the buildings. And the next tomb you all know, but is very under-examined, is the tomb of the Qin Huangdi at Xi'an, at Shenyang. And that too has been examined in detail, and it consists of two very different parts. It has now this is really large scale. This is 30 meters deep, and it's the grave itself with a tomb chamber, and it's surrounded by a wall. On the top, on the earth of the top, they have built this structure, which is a series of platforms. They're very high, and they have been examined by sensing and by excavation. So that, and what's more, then they go all the way around like this, and they have buildings on them. They also show fragments of columns and of tiles. So that we have, initially, the director of the Archaeology Institute suggested that this was a kind of park for the first emperor to visit in his afterlife. I think it's more likely to have looked like a big monument of a building going high into the sky. I mean, this is 60 meters, 30 meters down and 30 meters up. I mean, it's an absolutely enormous building. And we need to think about the first emperor. The first emperor, the Duan Qingbo, who did this work, speculated that he got a lot of ideas from further west. And that was not particularly popular in with his Chinese colleagues. I think there's no doubt that this is an indigenous development. The building in Loess like this could only have happened in China. And it could only have happened by people who are very familiar in working in Loess on this scale. I mean, building up 30 meters in Loess is terrifying, really. And it gives me dizziness immediately. But I think it's very likely that the first emperor heard news of other monuments in other parts of the world, and that he wanted to be as good and bigger and better. I mean, we've heard of that before. So I think really we are looking at something quite important in the history of building in China, which has been forgotten because it's fallen apart, and people have not thought about the value of platforms in construction in this way. So if we go now into a few quick steps on the later structures, we can see at once that people studying these buildings think that they built high up on solid areas. They created solid areas of earth. They took the existing earth and they built up to create an impressive size. So this is the speculation about how the palace of the first emperor was built. It's not my suggestion, but it looks very plausible, and it's using the existing ground, cutting some away and adding more to other parts. And here we have a mixture. This is a speculation, if you like, but this is a building here, the Weiyang Palace of the Western Han, that is the 3rd to 2nd century BC, which was excavated. And what it shows you is that it's very likely that they used earthen cores for these buildings, and they used the fall of the land, they used the way the land went up, and they also did something that we saw in the Gugong. They created a series of buildings which themselves have a big aesthetic appeal and that aren't just impressive from a distance. The buildings on those tomb mounds would have been very impressive from a distance. But here we see an important new development, which is this is based on clear excavation with enormous sizes, 350 meters north to south, that they are interested in the sequence of buildings and the progressive height. We also know that the structure we're familiar with already existed. This is a building of a watchtower in ceramic in the British Museum of the Han period, for which there are plenty of excavated examples. They have tiled, it's imitating in a model, but it's showing you they had tiled roofs, wooden structures with decorative appendages, and so that the idea that wood was being used with tiled roofs is well established. Tiling had been started probably 800 or more years before, and probably, as I've suggested, the wooden structures are not unique to this area. They've probably been used all over China by now, but of course the wood is falling away. I mean, China's going to have a shortage of wood fairly quickly. So this is a drawing of from the tomb of an imperial prince of the early 8th century, showing that this is a creation of towers, probably of earth again, but faced by brick. And then we have the Tang mural that we've seen before, and we also have the sketch, and I'm pretty sure that they will have had some of the platforms will have been made for ceremonies, and some will have been permanent and part of the building structure. And this isn't the only mural. This is a very well-known mural in the Yenshan Monastery in Shanxi, dated to 1153. So, and in all these cases, you see people. Here are people on the platforms. So the platforms are not just decorative, they are for ceremonial use. And I think that we need to remember that buildings had platforms, and that buildings are not to be seen just as wooden structures, but to be part of a sequence of buildings that are seen as a whole, and also buildings that were much used for different ceremonies, different functions, of course, and probably quite frequently. That as you know, the 10-day week would have led to ancestral ceremonies. There will also have been Buddhist and Taoist activities in set days in any period. And I'm not going to talk at length about the wooden buildings because they are covered much more by people who have worked extensively. But this is the Hall of Great Harmony, the one in the Forbidden City that we looked at. And there's one important feature that one should stress about Chinese production. China can always produce things on a huge scale at a very high quality. And the reason why their buildings are so perfectly made is because they're not made on site. When Westerners build in stone, they're going to have to build on site. If you're going to build a cathedral, you're going to start from the ground up, and it may take 200 years. If you're going to build in wood, you design it, and it's made in its many parts, and there are said to be 10,000 parts in this hall of wood. Now, 10,000 is often just means, oh, they're an awful lot. So it doesn't have to mean 10,000, but one or two writers take that seriously, and the drawing on your right shows how they may have been put together, that they are actually all separately made, and then I have watched it being done. They're still rebuilding early buildings in this way, in Shanxi province particularly. It's something that can be done perfectly. It doesn't have to be done with people working day and night in the rain, as it would do in northern England. It is done very carefully and therefore produces a very beautiful effect, which is also carefully worked out geometrically. And of course it produces these large overhanging roofs made of tiles which then send the rain away. So the wood is protected by the shape of the roof. So unlike a Western building, which would have a trapezoidal, it would have straight triangular shape in the corner of the roof, this, using the structure of different non-aligned vertical columns with separate beams joining them, and with the dogong, the multiple, if you like, pieces that create the overhanging cantilever. If you can do that, then you will get a curved roof, which has this effect of throwing the rain away. So it's an incredibly sensible and clever idea. It's way back. It starts long before this. Of course, you all know that it's all going strong well before the Tang dynasty. And the other feature of building in wood is that you can build this way. You can choose to decide how many columns you have, how many dogong, the shape of the roof, the shape of the length of the beams, and to a lesser extent, the person who drew this for the Yingzhang Fashi reproduction showed you different kinds of platform. But what has been left out of this story up to now is the need for platforms. You cannot have this kind of architecture without a good platform. And you cannot have the sequence of buildings without a series of platforms. So one reason to build in wood is the platform made of earth is not strong enough to take the stone columns. But also, with Loess over everything, there's very little sign of stone. There is stone in the Taihang Mountains, in southern China, in Tibet, of course, there's lots of stone. But once an idea is established in a culture, it doesn't change. And I would say this was an example of something established primarily through the Loess Plateau, but also with contributions from other parts of China. And it's established long before we get to the Gugong. It comes right back to before the Bronze Age dynasties of the Xiaoshanzhou. It is much earlier, and it's therefore embedded in China long before. But it is easily adjusted to China's hierarchical structures. And to, if you look at a temple building like this is the Chongfu Mountain Monastery in Shanxi of 1143, I believe. And here in the drawing, you can see that the sequence of buildings was very important, both for ritual purposes and for aesthetic purposes. It's a work of art, but it's also a ritual art, and it's also a very important part of architecture. And here I have been unable to find enough drawings of cross sections to see what kinds of profile that these different monasteries achieve. So this I have found others, but this is the main one for which I have a good publication. And because people haven't looked so hard at the platforms, this has been an area that has not been discussed in any great detail, but was very important to how each monastery functioned. As you can see, there are different images in different buildings, and therefore this sequence is extremely important in religious and ritual terms. So that it's architecturally important, it's religiously important, and it's important in the performance of ritual. So it goes much further than that, because this, of course, is the origin of the whole architecture of East Asia. Here we have the Nanshan Pavilion in a monastery of 782 in Shanxi province. And this is the earliest surviving building. And of course, even now, it still has a large platform, staircase, and very small structure with a large overhanging roof. So it is this sort of building that was transferred to the Toshodaiji in Japan and to the Muryansu Hall in Korea. So behind it lies Shimao and the use of Loess platforms in the Loess Plateau. Without that, we would not have achieved this extraordinary, stable kind of architecture, which once started, swells and grows, and has had immense impact on the whole of East Asia. In fact, of course, people know about the impact of East Asia, but they don't know about the history behind it, and they don't know that it is this Loess area that drives the whole of the architecture. Because if it wasn't the Loess area, but was the Taihang Mountains, you would build in stone. This is not building in stone. You have to build in wood to build on an earthen platform. So it is one of the great creations of China for the world and should be looked at and measured against the stone architecture of Western Europe and East Asia, of West Asia. So I make quite a big claim. And here I just show you this once more. You see again that actually, if you stand on the ground and look up, the platforms are very dominant. And we underestimate them because we think, all right, they're just like any old stone platform, but they're not. They're part of a much longer tradition made of earth and here faced in stone. And as a result, I would say that if we look at China's civilization, then we have to say that it is the Loess Plateau and China that produces the platforms which makes Eastern wooden architecture, Far Eastern wooden architecture universal. Without the platforms, China would not have gone in this direction, and going in this direction has made an enormous impact on the world. Also, the Loess is responsible for deep tombs, and the Loess is extremely important for ceramic making for thousands of years, and indeed for bronze casting, as Nigel Wood in England and Chen Jianli in Beijing with his team have now recently published. And so that actually bronze casting of vessels would not look like it does today without the Loess. And this is really a fundamental feature of China that is not advertised, it's not described, it's not thought about. And I think it's of great interest because it goes right back to the site of Shimao, which made this huge contribution. The other great site is Liangzhu, and it is in the south, it's in the flooded area, and it's part of the big spread of rice across the world, but starting in southern China. And it is also, and I will explain further or talk further about it at the Palace Museum, it's also the source of jade. So the jade spread starts from Liangzhu. It has a much earlier history in the far north, but it spreads from Liangzhu. And also, I haven't discussed it, but water management is developed in the Yangtze era. And you also know about it from the Gorges Dam, which remains today a symbol of the need to control the water. So that the two different areas of China, as ever, contribute completely different features to China's civilization, to its culture and its history. And I haven't talked about it, we'll mention it next time. The Chinese characters, of course, come next at Anyang, and without the Chinese characters, the unification of these hugely diverse areas would not happen. So that you have to think of, in the very early periods of China's culture and civilization as coming from the south, from the north, and being unified by your writing and texts. And finally, I must thank many people, because this is a huge project, heavily dependent on Shimao and the director, Sun Jo-yung, and I would like to thank him particularly for inviting me to attend very important seminars where this whole site was revealed and discussed. And I'm grateful to all of you to listen to my talk, to the Vice-Chancellor and the heads of the institutes, to Maggie and everybody else for making it possible for me to present to you some unusual ideas about an unusual place. And I would also must thank all my former students, who include people who've worked on this area at great length, particularly Huan Limin, Feng Yingtong, and Tang Shaijia, who all wrote theses on these areas, without which I wouldn't have thought so hard about it and been so puzzled. In fact, the most important thing about China is its puzzling, and I think that leads people like me, who are outsiders, to think very hard about it. And I would like to emphasize how in debt I am, particularly to Beida and to Hangzhou, the Chinese Academy of Art, who have made it possible for me to travel so widely across China and look at this extraordinary culture and its civilization. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Professor Rawson, for that enlightening presentation. Please be seated. We'll now proceed to the discussion section, moderated by Professor Wen.
Thank you. I believe we all enjoyed Professor Rawson's lecture, which is truly original and thought-provoking. She placed Loess at the center of Chinese civilization, explaining its significance to the development of Chinese ceramics, bronze casting, the use of deep tombs in north-central China, and of course, most important of all, the long-standing architectural traditions of constructing wooden buildings on platforms made of earth and other mixture for ceremonial purposes. Now, she has highlighted Shima as a significant late Neolithic archaeological site that demonstrate the early architectural use of platform made from Loess, explained how the subsequent development of deep tombs combined with mounds and wooden architecture contributed to the enduring tradition of constructing platform for ceremonial buildings in China. So now I would like to open the floor for questions. So if you have questions, please raise your hand and we can start. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Professor Rawson, for your tremendously stimulating lecture. Your argument for Sima as a key source for later Central Plains material culture and architecture is truly compelling. I was particularly struck by your observation connecting Sima's stone carvings to Shijiahe jades and also the later Archaeological bronzes. This seems to create a very good chance for us to rewrite the early Chinese art history. So my question concerns the nature of the connection. Scholars like Li Xueqin and Hayashi Mino previously noted the similarities between bronze Taotie and earlier Liangzhu or Shijiahe motifs, but far from persuasive. Today, we see a far more convincing connection printed by you. And also with Sima in this picture, how would you characterize the vast cross-temporal relationship? What is the most convincing mechanism?
Well, I have to say this is very, if you like, speculative. At the same time, I would like and would prefer Shima and Shijiahe to be connected to the North China Plain. I am part resisting, can you hear me? In part, I'm resisting the wish for people to say Shima is an outside production. And in my article, which is going to be published in that volume, I do in fact show you the use of ceramics and cropping in millet as an example of the embeddedness of Shima in the local culture, and also the recent discovery of genetics. However, the earrings certainly make me think of Siberia. And I do think there's a lot more to be discussed. So I think there are two questions. The one you raise as to how is the connection made to the bronzes, and the other one, how do we have to think about Siberia or can we reject it? So I have, of course, been to Siberia on purpose to see this sort of thing. And Minusинsk is an important site. And some people would like to connect the shape of these faces to Okunev in Minusинsk. I'm not that keen, but you could look at Wang Peng's work. And he too brings in the jades. at the moment, there's too many people racing in all directions. And the one reason I would like to talk about platforms is I think the platform connection is quite clear, that the northern Loess plateau leads in due course to Taosi and, you know, thinking of Nanzhou and Lushanmao first, and then to Early Tou and Anyang and so on. What I think I mean, one has to leave quite a lot at this minute to Shimao and its excavators. They have, in fact, found bronze fragments there, and including arrowheads which I've seen in bronze, which are like Siberian arrowheads. So there is a sort of suggestion of some contact, but the dating is, I think, wobbly. And I started off thinking the initiator was the Shijiahe jade. Now I'm not sure, and I think one has to say that there is undoubtedly some sort of networking going on, and that probably does include Shimao, Shijiahe, and the bronzes. How it works, I don't know, but it is worth looking at Panlongcheng, which has, and Maria Hayutina has just published a paper showing that the weapons at Panlongcheng come from Siberia originally. The model is from Siberia. They're not from Siberia, they're modeled on Siberian. And I think several of us have given papers on weapons recently, and I think a whole group of us would say Chinese weapons of the early period are modeled on Siberian weapons, and something is going on in the weapon department. So I cannot tell you how it works. There is, I don't know if you know, there is a Shijiahe jade recently found at Shimao, very beautiful jade on birds, of the birds with the outstretched wings. So undoubtedly the Shijiahe jades are circulating, the weapons are circulating. Are the animals anyway connected? I don't know. And I leave it to you, you're younger and more. This is not a problem I can solve, but I think in all these areas, you can definitely see a network is formed. And I don't think we can think of the bronzes alone. They can't be just developing these patterns alone. I think the recent discoveries at Zhengzhou show us that we must look wider, including the gold, which I will mention next time.
Thanks so much.
Hi, Jessica. Thank you for this fabulous lecture. You look at platform with buildings on top. How about platforms without buildings on top? I'm thinking about Hongshan culture all the way down to some of the altars, say open air religious venues, have steps, including obviously the later examples of Tiantan. Whether that would be another line of investigation.
I'm definitely intrigued by Hongshan because they have stone outlined platforms. In fact, the Chinese excavators would always cite the platforms. The Hochengcui area has platforms. So they would certainly date the platforms as earlier than the defended regions at the top of hills. I definitely think platforms are relevant, and focusing on the earth to say, if you want to reach the Gugong, you're going to have platforms that stick out a long way, and you're going to have to use them for something. And I think you find that in Nanzhou, Lushanmao, and in Shimao. So I definitely think platforms, I'm less keen on Hongshan than I am with the altars at other sites. I think the altars are indeed relevant, and maybe they lead on to the platforms for buildings. So I definitely agree with you. I have looked hard at Hongshan. I'm not sure about Hongshan. Hongshan is not an area I want to mix with too much.
The Vice Chancellor.
Thank you for a fascinating talk. I mean, I'm clearly not in the field, but you mentioned some examples in Japan, and I wonder whether those temples, the platform, are they also made of Loess or of some other materials?
No, I think they're almost certainly made of brick and stone. I don't think they necessarily picked up the earth, but they may have done. And we could do with some Japanese excavations to look at this more carefully. The platform, the thing about Loess is it's really the main deposit is in China. But if you talk to geologists, they will tell you it's all over the Pacific. So it blows out of China across the Pacific. But I suspect the Japanese thought about the platforms themselves in their own tradition. They must, however, have received detailed information about the Chinese buildings directly from China, because Buddhism is introduced also from China. So they will have had plenty of relations with China to enable them to build in this particular way. What we value about Japan is they keep on rebuilding in the old style. They don't update quite as radically as the Chinese do. And so we have better ideas about the structure of a Tang Dynasty building in Japan. I don't think, I should definitely write to somebody in Japan and ask them, but I haven't tried to ask, and I suspect it's brick.
Yeah, it is brick and earth, no Loess.
Well, there's no Loess, but it could be earth and brick, yeah.
Earth, yes.
Thank you, Professor Rawson. Thank you for this wonderful and inspiring talk. And in the lecture, you make it very clear the connection between Shimao and other later dynasties in terms of the using of the earth platform tradition. And for archaeologists working on early China, what Shimao implies us is also related to the using of stone, because like lots of the stone pieces were used for building the wall and also the platform. So can you also give us some insight about the using of stone, because in later historical period, stone is also a very important component for the architecture, but not that early, of course. So I want to hear your insight and your idea about like the other contribution from Shimao in terms of the using of stone. Thank you.
Well, the real importance of Shimao's geographical position is it's at the point where the Loess is getting thinner and the stone is protruding. So there's a plenty supply of stone in that area. And Ho Chung Tsui, which I showed you, and there are other Inner Mongolia sites, also have stone. I think we shouldn't think about them thinking too much. They do what they can do. There's something surprising about Shimao, about the shape of the stones, because they're not cleverly shaped, but they're beautifully shaped. So clearly making stones fit together in a nice geometric pattern was important. And using the carved stones are very surprising, and they look as if they'd been reused. If they've come from an earlier phase of the building or from some local other place, we don't know. So China does use stone, particularly for pillar bases, and I don't think, however, they're as obsessed with stone as Western Europeans. And I would put our obsession down to the Romans. I mean, the other thing is to visit the Mediterranean. It's a useful place to go to see that the coastline is rocky. There is not lots of cultivated ground. Lots of areas have quickly rising mountains, and it's not a good area for building in earth. It's definitely got a lot of stone. So in southern England or parts of France, you wouldn't think about the stone. And so I would put the stone down to the amount of the building in the Mediterranean, in Egypt and in Greece, and then taken by the Romans as a sign of, well, we're as good as them, aren't we? And in the case of China, I think probably you will be better placed than I am to think about the degree to which stone is auspicious, a sign of some indication of connection with the earth. I would certainly try to think of it in that way, rather than thinking of it as an architectural tradition. I think it's a sign of importance of certain activities. In the case of looking at a Buddhist sculpture, both the ornament, the sort of thing I write about in the Lotus and the Dragon, and when we visited the wonderful building, the monastery designed by Professor Ho, we saw some Buddhist platforms which were stepped in and then stepped out again, and I would put that down to the introduction of Hellenistic architecture with Buddhism, so that some kinds of stone and some kinds of activity related particularly to Buddhism comes from the Hellenistic areas of Syria and central areas of Western Asia rather than from China. But so China is, to me, the most skilled example of a culture that remains totally committed to its own culture, but if it sees something useful, will include it. So I think there's some indigenous use of stone and a lot of inclusion.
Thank you, Professor Rawson, for a wonderful talk. I wonder if you can comment on the scale of the decorations that we see in the Shimao carvings on the terrace, because from your slides, it looks like the decoration is probably the wrong term, but it looks like the carvings are really large in scale, whereas the comparisons with the jades and the bronzes are probably much smaller, tiny pieces. So how do we make sense of these kind of, vastly different, similar?
Well, I think, like Professor Pang raised the question, is what is it all about? And I think China would not be so interesting if we understood immediately. And what I do think is that the carving is worth looking at to see much of it is in raised line. Now, if you're going to do your design in raised line on stone, that means you're chiseling it away to leave the line raised. And I find that very strange, and therefore is in fact the original, the jade or the ceramic somewhere. I mean, because leaving a raised line, the face is about this size in the real world, on the stone. I mean, they're not huge, they're this size. But doing that in a raised line on the stone is very hard work and very easy to get wrong. I mean, slip of a chisel and the whole thing is damaged. So I do think we're looking at something we don't understand, and I think the stone work must come from another site because it's shoved into the wall, not necessarily in a well-organized way. So it doesn't need to have come from far away, because carrying this large, long pieces of stone is not, I don't know how they would have done it except with manual, carrying it with a group of men. So it could have been rebuilt. The area, the Shimao is not all built in once. It's going to be built over, it's going to last the best part of 500 years or more. So it could have come from some other part of the structure. What I showed you was simply the central element which is built up to hold the palace and the tombs. It's a huge site of many square kilometers over a hilly area in which there are tombs and other buildings. So I just think that you have to remember the earrings bother me, but the jades and the stones have earrings. They're this sort of shape. And they also have this strange nose shape, which I think is also significant. I also think the eye is significant. So what is not clear is, and this I'm sure is right to question me about, is how do I think it got to the bronzes? I think that is a question, but I can't answer it, but I would refer you to the discussion of the Siberian weapons on which Panlongcheng is modelled some of its weapons. So it's not, the history of China at that moment is far from straightforward. It's quite complicated.
Do you believe they serve a ceremonial purpose in Shimao, those carvings?
The faces, I'm sure, are related to a belief system, undoubtedly, and I'm sure they conclude both the strange spirit face and the human face, but I don't know why. That's over to all of you who are much younger.
May I ask, what has led to your lifelong interest in Chinese art history?
What has led me there? Is that your question? Is why I do this? Why do I do this? I once went to the doctor and said my life at Oxford was rather difficult. He said, "Jessica, I think you like difficulties." So maybe that's the answer. I met Chinese characters first as a school child, and from that moment, I'm not good at writing in English. And so people who wrote in other scripts, I thought were onto something useful. So I was grateful that you could write in hieroglyphics or cuneiform or Chinese. But of course, as a school child, I couldn't learn Chinese. So I suppose it was just because everybody wanted to stop me learning Chinese, so I was determined to learn Chinese. And everybody said, you can't go to China, so I was determined to go to China. And that's how we got here. I mean, if you take it one step at a time, it's quite obvious. But if you decide that you're going to solve Shimao all at once, I think that's not how I started.
Thank you. Due to time constraint, I will now close the Q&A session and hand over to Yuki, our MC.
Once again, thank you, Professor Rawson, and thank you, Professor Wen. Now, may we invite Professor Low, on behalf of the Chinese University of Hong Kong, to present a souvenir to Professor Rawson. Professor Low and Professor Rawson, please.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you for coming. I mean,
May I now invite Professor Rawson and Professor Low to unveil the hand scroll. This exquisite piece bears the calligraphy of 后土无疆, graciously inscribed by Professor Tao Shuhui of the Department of Fine Arts, CHK. The phrase represents the Chinese translation of Professor Rawson's renowned work, Life and Afterlife in Ancient China.
thank you.
Thank
you
you,
very
Professor
much.
Low and Professor Rawson.
Thank you very much. It's most kind of you.
Next, may I invite Professor Max Tang Xiaobing, Director of the Institute of Chinese Studies and Dean of the Faculty of Arts, to present a souvenir to Ms. Lilian Qiang, Chief Executive Officer of the北山堂 Foundation, to thank北山堂 Foundation for the generous support over the past years. Thank you, Professor Tang and Ms. Lilian Qiang. Please remain on stage. May I now invite Professor Rawson and Professor Low to join Professor Tang and Ms. Qiang for a memorable photo, please.
Thank you.
Please remain on stage.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
May we also invite Professor Shen Mai Ha, Professor Maggie Wan Chui Ki, Professor Lai Chi Tim, Dr. Louis Ng, Professor Frank Finnerhorn, Professor Tian Wei, Professor Stephen Oppenheimer, Mr. Sito Yun Kit, Professor Josh Yu, Dr. He Jianfei, and Professor Ho Pui Peng to come forward for another group photo. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.